We were in Texas for 10 months, one school year, and it was a whirlwind. During the next 24 months, we moved 3 times. Long story short, although Clara's oxygen levels were much better living at this lower altitude, and she did not have to go on supplemental oxygen, so that was definitely a win. However, my whole theory about this long-term oxygen deprivation and her getting better, well, that little theory of mine did not end up panning out. Sometimes I wonder if we made the right decision, if all the chaos and stress from these 2 years of moving across the country was worth it. Did it buy the girls more time, more quality of life? If we had stayed in Colorado, would they have lived as long? Would they have suffered less? Would they have suffered more? The decision to move was a decision with a high cost on so many levels, not just to us, but also to our extended families. I've often said that the only 2 constants in life are God and change. And it's a good thing that our first constant, God, never changes. Like it says in Hebrews, He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Without that bright star of His ever-present love to guide us through life's storms, we'd be adrift at the mercy of forces beyond our control. And that's exactly how I felt, adrift at the mercy of forces beyond my control. One squall after another would shake my small vessel to the core. But by grace, I remembered to look up, and my bright and shining Savior was always there. And through dark, windswept clouds, I locked my course on that constant. Please forgive my sailing analogies and storm analogies. I tend to make a lot of them because they just work for everything. The plan was to move into an apartment, see how things went, and possibly to permanently stay in Texas. The first few months there were hard, but okay. There were no huge changes. Clara and Anna's team at Children's in Denver had helped us get hooked up with all the right doctors. So while we waited for these appointments, we hung out at the apartment pool and at a really, really cool playground that was about 5 minutes from where we were living. The girls saw 4 or 5 new doctors while we were living here during these 10 months. We were hoping for new insights that we never received, because every doctor we met was always very perplexed by the girls' situation. Each visit was basically just an opportunity to get progressed farther and farther up the ladder. And I knew that, and I knew it was part of the process that we had to go through, so that's what we did. In the conventional world, the top of the ladder for rare and undiagnosed diseases would be to be accepted into a special program run by the NIH called the UDN. And the UDN stands for the Undiagnosed Disease Network, and it is a special program funded by the National Institute for Health, and you have to apply to get in. And if they accept you, they pay for the most up-to-date genetic testing, not only for the patient, but for the patient's entire family. They do a really thorough job of looking at all of the genetics. We had a really sweet neurologist in Austin that we really only saw a few times, but she did us such a great favor by going ahead and applying to that program for us. By the time our acceptance into that program had come through, we already knew that we weren't going to be staying in Texas, that we would be moving temporarily to Southern California, and our first initial appointments were still several months off. Everyone was really hopeful that the UDN would be able to find some sort of specific genetic variation or compare it with other rare cases and make some conclusions there and be able to offer us some sort of diagnosis. And well, personally in my heart, I never cared about a diagnosis specifically because I knew any diagnosis was going to be bad. But what I did care about was treatment, and a diagnosis would help us to find a more effective treatment for the girl's symptoms. Because through all of this, I haven't really talked a lot about medicines or things like that, and that's simply because they were ineffective We tried every medication our doctors offered to us, but Clara either had adverse effects or there was no effect at all. And there were also heavy side effects for these things. So for a really long time into this process, she was essentially unmedicated. She was on some low doses of a couple things, but she really didn't take much medicine at all. That's another thing. Sometimes I go back and have second thoughts about it. I said, did I under-medicate her? Did I not try enough? But then I look back and said, no, like we did try this, and we tried this, and we tried this, and we tried this 2 times, and we tried this 3 times. And we really didn't find any combinations of medications that worked well for her. Eventually, and this will be in a later episode, there was one little trifecta of medications that one of the doctors in California figured out that did help her to some degree. It wasn't like, oh yay, everything's fine now, but it did seem to calm her shaking down relatively significantly, and that was a good thing. But we didn't get to that point for still another year. Okay, so let's get back into where we are now, which is, let me look at my notes. So like I said, things had already begun declining quite a lot before we moved to Texas. And when we got to Texas, it became really unhinged because Clara started declining more rapidly. I don't think it had anything to do with the move. I think that's just the trajectory she was on. It would have happened anyways, but unfortunately it happened when we were many miles from any family. The best thing that happened to us when we were living in Texas was we found an amazing church. This body of believers welcomed us with open arms. They prayed for us and cried with us. They lifted us up in prayer. They were generous and thoughtful and earnest in their compassion for our family and our daughters. If anyone from Believers Church is watching this, thank you. You kept us from sinking during this time. It was in this church that Clara and Anna were baptized, and it was a very special day. Clara and Anna had both trusted Jesus as their personal savior years before their baptism. And at this point, Clara was 10 years old and Anna was 7.5. And we had begun talking about baptism and they both wanted to do it. So we made the arrangements and the girls both shared a testimony and were baptized. We were on a 2nd level apartment and you went in the door and then it had these carpeted stairs that went up to the living area. Oh, those stairs were brutal. I mean, when we first got there, Clara could go up and down them fine. I mean, she held the rail and took her time, but by the end of our time there, she couldn't go up the stairs at all. We had to carry her up, and she was probably like 60, 65 pounds. So I could carry her up, but it wasn't safe to do. Some days she had enough energy if we came back from going to the grocery store or something like that. She would crawl up the steps a lot of the time. And then when Aaron was not at work and home and we came back, he would carry her up. By the end of our time there, we were basically stuck up there because she couldn't go up and down the steps. And I didn't feel safe carrying her up and down the steps. And so all day while Aaron was at work, I was just stuck there in this little apartment with the 3 kids. And we, I'll say that, we survived. We kept homeschooling and we watched a lot of TV. Our balcony opened up onto the central area and there was this little path around. So sometimes I would leave Clara up there with the door open and go outside to the path and let Isaac ride his little bike around the thing and kind of keep an eye on him. And I could hear Clara if she needed me. And you know, it was not world's greatest scenario. During our time in Texas, Clara had an additional eye surgery because the cataracts had become cloudy, which sometimes happens. And so they have to do another procedure that's much quicker and less invasive, but they still put her under anesthesia and they go in and clean up the cataracts. Actually, it was 2 procedures because one on each eye again. And that was a drive to Houston because the ophthalmologist we were seeing was in Houston and we had that done there. And Houston was about 2.5 or 3 hours from where we where it was crazy. My mom and dad would fly in from Colorado and stay with the other two kids while I took Clara to an appointment. They went to some appointments with us. It was, I don't know, they were back and forth several times and it's all a blur. Before the end of our time in Texas, we ended up having to buy Clara a wheelchair off of Amazon. She could start off walking in the morning and get around okay, but she would tire really easily. So if we went out shopping or went out to a park as a family or anything like that, we took the wheelchair now, and she would walk for a little while and then she would get tired and ride in the wheelchair. And then it eventually got to the point where she pretty much just wanted to ride in the wheelchair wherever we were going. It's exhausting just thinking about it. Okay, moving on. So obviously we felt really trapped in this situation. We knew we weren't going to stay in Texas, but we had to decide what we were going to do. What was our next step? And honestly, we didn't know. We knew that we would be getting results from the NIH and that whole process would take about a year to have the tests and results done, and that we would be doing that in California. And so my mother-in-law and father-in-law graciously allowed us to come into their house and pretty much take over for 14 months. So thank you guys. So they came out to Texas and they helped us move. They flew out and we picked them up, and we had our van to drive with the children in it. And then we had the moving truck. One not that big moving truck with all of our stuff in it is all that was left. Each time we moved places, we kind of chucked stuff out. We didn't actually chuck stuff out the windows, but I just have this feeling of me like driving down the road in a moving truck, just chucking our life possessions out the window, like lightening the load every time we went. I remember this one Saturday we were at our storage unit because in Texas we had way too much stuff crammed into that apartment, and we had a storage unit for our other stuff. And then when we knew we still weren't going to be settled for, we didn't know how long, we did the math and we realized that moving the stuff and storing the stuff would be more expensive than buying new stuff, which it all just kind of stinks. But we were just hauling stuff off to the Goodwill and selling the bigger ticket items we could on Craigslist and just getting rid of stuff. So I do want to give a shout out here to both my parents and my parents-in-law. Both sets of parents have just been so wonderful during this whole thing. Both of them could have just gone and hung out in Hawaii or done their own thing and been like involved but not involved, and kind of shielded their hearts from some of the torment and anguish of the whole situation. But they didn't do that. They engaged wholeheartedly. And they were partakers in the suffering with us, and it made it bearable. I always say that we had the best case scenario of the worst case circumstances, and that's because of our families. We had support and we had resources, and I know that my family isn't the only family that has suffered greatly. And I also know how very, very fortunate we are, because in the middle of circumstances like this, there are those that have the support and resources that we have had, and there's those that don't. And I cannot imagine having endured all of this without that support. So we made the drive to California and moved into the Lusk household.
Driving across country. We're still in Texas. This is Aaron driving the truck. This is for a memory.
And there was considerable rearranging of furniture and moving of boxes and reorganizing of refrigerators. The kids loved being around Nana and Papa and their aunts and uncles and cousins. We had to hit the ground running because Clara needed almost immediate medical care. We were also able to get Clara set up with non-income based Medicaid now because of her blindness and multiple disabilities, which was a total crazy experience to get everything together to get that to happen, but was a huge blessing because once she had that, Medicaid paid for like everything that was in the traditional Western medical box. And that was really great. They paid for her wheelchairs and her equipments and her hospital stays and all the things like that. So that is where we are going to end for today. This just goes on, and I want you to know that this channel isn't just going to be me telling all these stories like this all the time. This is just like the backstory, like getting to know each other. There will be themes and content explored that really branch off in a different direction. But this is where I felt like I needed to start. Maybe this is just my own therapy. Rehashing this, going through all this again one more time to put it out there for any benefit it may have for anyone who cares to listen, and release it and move on to what's next. So maybe that's what this is all about anyways, but I'm glad you're here. Thank you for listening to this story, and lots of love till next time.